The hall was buzzing with energy that morning. It was one of those big national competitions where everyone came dressed in their finest clothes, carrying folders, equipment, or instruments, depending on what they were competing in. Some walked with confidence, their parents and coaches following right behind, whispering last-minute advice in their ears. Others stood in groups laughing loudly, trying to look relaxed while secretly feeling the weight of the day pressing on their shoulders. Among all those shining faces, one girl quietly walked in alone. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes or carrying expensive equipment. She wore a neat but simple outfit, her hair pulled back, her shoulders straight, and her step steady. She wasn't loud, she didn't try to catch attention, and yet people noticed her right away, but not in the way you'd expect. The stares began almost instantly. A few contestants exchanged glances, then smirked as if they had just spotted someone who didn't belong. A group of parents whispered to each other, their eyes sliding toward her before looking away with that same dismissive expression. It was as if they had silently agreed on something. She's not going to last long here, the girl noticed. How could she not? The glances weren't subtle, but she didn't say anything. She kept walking until she found her assigned seat in the hall, sat down and quietly opened her folder. All around her, conversations buzzed. Contestants boasted about their preparation, talking about private tutors, international workshops, and expensive training camps. One boy leaned back in his chair, loudly mentioning how his father had flown him overseas just to attend a summer program. Another girl showed off her brand new laptop, bought only for the competition, explaining how her family spared no cost for her success. The quiet girl listened without reacting. She didn't have those stories. She didn't have the resources or the shiny new tools. What she had was hours of practice in a small, cramped room, often staying up late into the night while everyone else in her neighborhood slept. But she kept that to herself. She had learned early in life that not everyone needed to know your story. Sometimes the best way to respond was to let your work speak louder than words. Still, the whispers didn't stop. A few contestants even leaned closer to one another and chuckled, not bothering to hide the fact that they were talking about her. I don't even know why they let everyone in this year, one muttered. Standards are dropping. Another added with a laugh. She probably won't even make it past the first round. The girl's face remained calm, but inside she felt the sting. She was used to it. From school to everyday life, she had grown accustomed to people underestimating her the moment she walked into a room. Sometimes they doubted her because of the way she looked. Sometimes it was because of where she came from. Sometimes it was simply because she didn't carry herself with the flashy confidence others expected. Whatever the reason, people rarely believed she deserved to be in the same space as them, and today was no different. As the judges entered the hall, the atmosphere shifted. Everyone straightened up, their nervous chatter replaced with silence. The panel looked impressive, well-dressed, serious, holding thick files with contestant details. They scanned the room, nodding occasionally at familiar faces, clearly recognizing some of the contestants who came from prestigious schools or well-known families. When their eyes landed on the quiet girl, something unspoken passed between a few of them. It wasn't cruelty, but it wasn't encouragement either. It was that subtle look of doubt, the kind that said, "We'll see how long you last." The first instructions were given, and the competition began. One by one, contestants took their turns. Some stumbled nervously, while others performed with the confidence of someone who had been preparing their entire life for this moment. The audience clapped politely, and the judges scribbled notes on their sheets. While waiting for her turn, the girl sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, her mind steady. She could hear the quiet chuckles behind her, the muttered predictions that she wouldn't do well. At one point, someone even whispered loudly enough for her to catch, "This is going to be embarrassing." She felt her stomach twist, not because she believed them, but because she knew exactly what they were thinking. To them, she wasn't a real competitor. She was an outsider, someone who had somehow slipped through the cracks of the system, someone who was only there to fill space. But they didn't know her story. They didn't know the countless nights she spent practicing until her hands cramped. They didn't know how she studied from secondhand books because new ones were too expensive. They didn't know how she watched free tutorials online, sometimes sitting in places with weak internet just to catch a few more lessons. They didn't know the determination that burned inside her. To them, She was just a quiet girl who didn't look like she belonged, and yet, as she sat there, her heart beating steadily, she wasn't thinking about proving them wrong. She wasn't even thinking about the trophy or the prize at the end. She was thinking about something much deeper, about all the times she had been told she wasn't good enough and about how she had pushed through anyway. This wasn't just a competition to her. This was a chance to show herself what she was capable of, no matter what the world thought. The first round continued, and slowly the room grew more tense. Contestants who had been bragging minutes ago stumbled over small mistakes. Parents who had been smiling proudly began to frown, whispering nervously when their children didn't perform as expected. Even the judges, who started off with casual expressions, grew more serious as the difficulty increased. The girl watched it all quietly, taking it in. Every stumble reminded her that this wasn't about who had the most money or who had the fanciest resources. It was about skill, focus, and resilience, and those were things she knew she carried within her. But none of that mattered to the others. From where they were sitting, she was still the least likely to succeed. As the round drew closer to her turn, the whispers picked up again. "She's next," someone muttered with a laugh. "This is going to be funny." Another leaned back and smirked, already looking at the judges as if to share the joke before it even happened. The girl heard it all. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes waiting for her to fail. For a brief moment, doubt crept in like a small shadow that whispered, "Maybe they're right." But then she remembered. She remembered the night she stayed awake while her little siblings slept beside her. She remembered the afternoons when she practiced outside, using whatever space she could find, ignoring the stares of neighbors who wondered why she bothered. She remembered the voice inside her that had carried her this far, the voice that always said, "You don't need them to believe in you. You just need to believe in yourself." Her breathing steadied, her fingers unclenched. She looked straight ahead, no longer paying attention to the whispers. When her name was finally called, she stood up calmly, her steps firm as she walked to the front. The room grew quiet, not out of respect but out of curiosity. Everyone was waiting to see her stumble. Everyone was waiting to see their assumptions confirmed. And that's exactly what made the moment so powerful. Because no one in that room expected what would happen next. The air in the hall grew heavier as the rounds moved forward. The competition was getting tougher, and it was clear that the judges weren't impressed easily. Some contestants who had walked in with glowing confidence were now leaving the stage with trembling hands and nervous smiles, trying to hide their mistakes. The audience clapped politely, but the disappointment on their faces showed everything. The girl watched quietly from her seat. She saw how even those who came with expensive training and resources were faltering under pressure. Their perfect rehearsed routines looked shaky once they were under the bright lights, with the eyes of the judges fixed on them. Some forgot lines, others missed steps, and a few broke down midway. But while others were breaking, she was growing calmer. It wasn't that she wasn't nervous, of course she was. Her palms were sweating, her heart was racing. But she had been in situations where the pressure was much worse. Nights when the electricity cut out in her house and she had to practice in the dim glow of a candle. Days when her stomach ached from hunger. But she still kept studying or practicing because she didn't want to waste even a single day. Compared to those struggles, this stage, this pressure felt almost familiar. Still, the doubt from others lingered in the air. When her turn approached, she heard a chuckle from the row behind her. A voice whispered, "She won't last 5 minutes." Another laughed quietly, as though they were already celebrating her failure before she had even begun. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. She had learned long ago not to answer with words. Words didn't convince people like that. The only thing that did was results. But for a moment, a small crack of doubt opened inside her. What if they were right? What if all her hard work wasn't enough? What if the years of sacrifice only led to failure in front of this crowd? The thought was sharp, like a blade cutting into her confidence. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of why she was here. She hadn't come all this way just to prove something to strangers. She was here because she loved what she did. She was here because she had a dream that had carried her through nights of tears and mornings of exhaustion. The announcer called her name. She rose from her seat, her steps steady. But inside, the weight of the moment pressed on her chest. The hall felt colder, the lights brighter. The stage looked larger than before, and the silence from the audience made every footstep echo louder. She climbed the steps, adjusted her stance, and looked at the judges. Their expressions were unreadable, their pens poised above their sheets, ready to note her first mistake. The audience leaned forward, some smirking, others curious. She closed her eyes for a brief second, blocking out the noise, the whispers, the doubt. She thought of her late-night practices, the countless times she repeated the same routine until it felt like second nature. She thought of the sacrifices, the hunger, the exhaustion. She thought of the little voice inside her that always told her, "Keep going. You're stronger than they think." When she opened her eyes, something shifted. Her nerves didn't vanish, but they no longer controlled her. What took over was focus, deep, sharp focus. She started her performance, and from the very first move, the energy in the room changed. The audience, who had expected to see her stumble, went silent. There was no laughter, no whispers now. Her steps were precise, her words clear, her rhythm unshakable. Each movement carried confidence, not the loud kind that boasted before a match, but the quiet kind that comes from years of dedication. The judges, too, straightened in their seats. Their pens, which had been ready to mark faults, paused for a moment. Their eyes sharpened, watching closely, realizing that what they were seeing was not what they expected. Every second she spent on that stage was a battle, not against the competition, but against the doubts that had been thrown at her since the day she walked in. With each step, with each flawless delivery, she was proving something, not just to the room, but to herself. By the middle of her performance, the silence in the hall had shifted from doubt to awe. Even those who had mocked her earlier were leaning forward now, their smirks erased, their eyes wide. They weren't expecting this. No one had been. She could feel it too. That energy in the room, the shift in the air, it gave her more strength, more courage to keep going. She poured everything she had into that moment. The sleepless nights, the hunger, the pain, the tears. It all flowed into her performance, turning into something powerful that no one could look away from. But it wasn't easy. At one point, a small mistake almost crept in. Her foot slipped slightly. Her hand trembled for a second. For a heartbeat, fear rose in her chest. What if this ruins everything? But then she caught herself. Instead of panicking, she steadied her breath and kept going, smoothing over the mistake so quickly that most people didn't even notice. That was her strength, not perfection, but resilience. The ability to recover, to keep moving forward even when something went wrong. By the time she reached the end, the hall was dead silent. The kind of silence that doesn't come from boredom, but from being completely captivated. And when she delivered her final move, her final words, her final step, it was like the entire room had been holding its breath and only now remembered to exhale. For a long second, no one clapped. Not because they weren't impressed, but because they were stunned. They hadn't expected this from her. They hadn't expected her to stand on that stage and own it the way she just had. Then slowly the applause began. At first polite, then louder, then thunderous. People stood up, clapping harder, some even whistling in surprise. The judges exchanged looks, nodding slightly, writing quickly in their notes. The girl stood there, breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling as the sound of the applause washed over her. She didn't smile widely or raise her arms in triumph. She just stood steady, calm, her eyes glistening, not with pride alone, but with relief. Relief that she had done it. That all the sacrifices, all the nights of doubt, all the quiet endurance had led to this moment. As she walked off the stage, the same people who had whispered about her earlier now stared in silence. The smirks were gone, replaced with something else. Respect, maybe even shame. She returned to her seat, and for the first time since the competition began, she allowed herself a small smile. Not because she had impressed them, but because she had stayed true to herself. Because she hadn't let their doubt control her. In that moment, she realized something important. Victory isn't just about trophies or recognition. Sometimes the real victory is standing tall when everyone expects you to fall. And that was exactly what she had just done. When she stepped off the stage, the sound of applause was still ringing in her ears. It wasn't just polite clapping anymore. It had been real, full of energy, the kind that people couldn't hold back even if they tried. She had felt it deep inside her chest like a wave crashing over her. But she didn't let it distract her. She sat back in her seat, breathing slowly, keeping her expression calm. She didn't want to look like she was celebrating too soon. There were still more rounds ahead, and she knew the toughest part was yet to come. The other contestants, however, weren't as calm. A few glanced at her with wide eyes, as if they couldn't believe what they had just seen. Some whispered to each other quietly, no longer laughing. The smugness that had filled the room earlier had shifted into unease. They realized now that she wasn't someone to overlook. She wasn't just another competitor who would be eliminated quickly. She was a serious contender, and that made them nervous. As the next contestants performed, the judges watched more carefully. The audience clapped politely, but the energy wasn't the same. It was as though the girl's performance had raised the bar so high that everything afterward felt smaller in comparison. But with that respect came something else, more pressure. Now people weren't ignoring her. They were watching her closely, waiting to see if she could maintain that level, or if her first success had just been luck. During the short break, she sat quietly with her hands resting in her lap. Around her, contestants pulled out their phones to call parents or coaches, some practicing hurriedly in the corners of the hall. A few stole quick glances at her, whispering under their breath. She knew what they were saying. Some were admitting she had surprised them. Others were likely plotting how to outshine her in the next round. For a moment, doubt tried to creep back in. What if she couldn't keep it up? What if her next performance didn't match the first? Would they call her a one-time wonder? Would they say it had been a fluke? She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, reminding herself why she was there. She wasn't competing for their approval. She wasn't here to prove herself to the ones who had laughed at her. She was here for the younger version of herself, the girl who had once been told she didn't deserve to dream. The second round began, and the tasks grew harder. Each contestant was given less time to prepare and more difficult challenges to complete. It was designed to test not just skill but also focus, adaptability, and resilience under pressure. Contestants who had breezed through the first round now struggled. Some cracked under the pressure, others froze on stage. A few tried to laugh off their mistakes, but the judges' serious expression showed they weren't amused. The atmosphere in the hall became tense, and even the audience, who had been cheerful earlier, grew quieter. When her turn came again, the girl walked up to the stage with the same calm steps as before. But inside, she could feel her heartbeat pounding in her chest. She knew the judges were watching her more closely now. She knew the audience was holding higher expectations. She took her position, steadied her breath, and began. This time, the challenge was more complex, requiring quick thinking and precision. At first, her movements flowed smoothly, her focus sharp. But halfway through, a sudden obstacle appeared, something she hadn't anticipated. For a split second, her mind blanked. Her heart skipped, panic almost breaking her rhythm. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if she would stumble, but she didn't. Instead, she drew from all the time she had practiced in imperfect conditions, when the lights had gone out at home, when her tools had broken, when nothing went according to plan. She had learned to adjust, to improvise, to keep going no matter what. And that skill saved her now. With steady hands and calm focus, she shifted her approach, turning what could have been a mistake into part of her performance. To the audience, it looked intentional. To the judges, it showed quick thinking and composure. By the end, the applause was even louder than before. Not just for the skill she had shown, but for the way she had carried herself under pressure. People admired perfection, but they respected resilience even more. She walked off the stage, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She knew she had done well, but she also knew the hardest round was still ahead. The final round was always the most intense. It was where contestants either rose to glory or crumbled under the weight of expectations. By now, the number of competitors had thinned. Some had already been eliminated, their dreams ending right there in the hall. Others sat nervously, hoping their names wouldn't be called next. The atmosphere was heavier than ever, the silence between performances thick with tension. When the girl's name was announced for the final round, the room stirred. All eyes turned to her, some with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few still with disbelief. Could she really do it again? Could she win against contestants who had every advantage she didn't? She rose slowly, her steps steady as always. But this time, her heart felt like it was carrying the weight of every struggle she had endured. She thought of her parents who couldn't afford to be there to watch her. She thought of her siblings who believed in her even when no one else did. She thought of her younger self sitting in a dimly lit room, dreaming of this very moment. The stage lights felt brighter than before, almost blinding. She took her position and the room fell into silence. This was it, the moment of truth. Her performance began, and from the very first second, It was clear this was different. This wasn't just a routine. This was her heart, her soul. Her entire journey poured into every movement, every sound, every word. It wasn't just skill, it was emotion. The audience felt it. The judges felt it. Even the contestants who had dismissed her before felt it. Every step she took carried the weight of her struggles. Every expression showed the pain she had turned into strength. Every detail reflected the countless nights she had given up sleep, the countless sacrifices she had made. She wasn't just performing, she was telling a story. Her story. And by the time she reached the final part, there wasn't a single person in that hall who could look away. When she finished, the silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly the applause began again. Louder, stronger, rising like a wave until it filled the hall. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting. The girl stood in the center of the stage, her chest heaving, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. She had done it. The hall was still shaking with applause long after she left the stage. People clapped, cheered, and whispered to one another, trying to put into words what they had just witnessed. The girl who no one thought could make it this far had just delivered a performance that silenced every doubt in the room. But she didn't celebrate. Not yet. She sat quietly in her seat, her chest still rising and falling from the effort, her palms still damp with sweat. She didn't know what the judges had written in their notes. She didn't know if she had scored higher than the others. All she knew was that she had given everything she had. She had left nothing behind. The final few contestants went up after her, but the energy in the hall was different now. Their performances were good, some even excellent, but the audience was still thinking about her. The judges wrote carefully, but their expressions were unreadable. Finally, the time came for the results. The contestants were called back to the stage. They lined up side by side, trying to look confident while their hearts raced inside their chests. Some clasped their hands together, whispering quiet prayers. Others forced smiles, pretending not to care, though their nervous glances betrayed them. The girl stood among them, her face calm, but her heart was pounding so loudly she thought others might hear it. The head judge stepped forward with a microphone in hand. The hall went silent instantly. Every contestant, every parent, every member of the audience leaned forward, waiting. The judge began speaking about the competition, the high level of talent, the challenges faced, and the way the contestants had given their best. The words felt endless, dragging the moment longer and longer, building the tension in the room. The girl listened quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't expecting anything. She had come this far without expecting favors, without expecting applause. If she didn't win, she knew she had still achieved something priceless. She had proved, at least to herself, that she belonged. Then the judge began announcing the names. Third place was called first. A contestant stepped forward, smiling, though the disappointment in their eyes was clear. Then second place was announced, and another contestant walked forward to accept their prize. Now, only one spot was left. The judge paused, looking at the remaining contestants. The hall grew so quiet that even the sound of someone coughing in the back seemed loud. Everyone was holding their breath, and then the name was called. It was hers. For a split second, she didn't move. Her heart stopped, her mind blank. She had heard the name, but she couldn't believe it was real. Then slowly, as the applause exploded around her, she stepped forward. The audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. Some of the very people who had doubted her were now clapping the loudest, their earlier smirks replaced by wide-eyed admiration. Even the judges, who had worn serious expressions all day, were smiling now, nodding as if to say, "You earned this." The girl accepted the trophy with trembling hands. It felt heavy, not just in weight, but in meaning. She held it close, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to blink away. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, but she had never imagined how it would truly feel. She looked out at the audience, and for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel underestimated. She felt seen, but more than that, she felt proud. Not because she had won, but because she had stayed true to herself every step of the way. As the applause continued, flashes of her journey filled her mind. The nights she studied by dim light, the times she practiced outside with nothing but determination, the moments she wanted to quit but kept going anyway, the times people laughed at her, doubted her, or told her she wasn't good enough. All of it had led to this. She wasn't just holding a trophy. She was holding proof. Proof that hard work matters. Proof that resilience matters. Proof that no one else gets to decide what you're capable of. After the ceremony ended, people came up to her. Contestants who had once dismissed her now shook her hand with respect. Parents who had whispered about her now congratulated her warmly. Even strangers from the audience came forward, telling her how inspiring she had been. She smiled politely, grateful for the kindness, but inside she thought of something else. She thought of the young girls who might one day hear her story. Girls who, like her, were told they didn't belong, that they weren't enough. She hoped that when they heard what she had done, they would believe a little more in themselves. Because her victory wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been underestimated. Later that night, when the hall was empty and the lights were dimmed, she sat alone with the trophy beside her. She ran her fingers along its smooth surface, still trying to believe it was real. She thought of her family, who couldn't be there but would be overjoyed when they heard the news. She thought of her siblings, who would finally see that all those late nights had meant something. She thought of herself, the little girl who once sat in a corner with secondhand books, dreaming of this moment, and she realized something important. The victory wasn't just standing on stage with a trophy in her hands. The victory was every step of the journey. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment she had refused to give up. That was the real win. The trophy would sit on a shelf one day, gathering dust. But the lessons, the strength she had gained, and the courage she had discovered, that would stay with her forever. She stood, lifting the trophy one more time, feeling its weight in her hands. Then she whispered softly to herself, "This is only the beginning." And she meant it. Because once you prove to yourself that you can rise, no one can ever take that away. That day, she didn't just win a competition. She won her dignity, her respect, and her place in a world that once doubted her. And for everyone who watched her, it was a reminder that true strength doesn't come from privilege or resources. It comes from heart, from resilience, and from never giving up.